leaders. Welcome into the Sandbox. I'm Tammy J. Bond, host of the Leadership Sandbox podcast, and thrilled to have you join me today as we dive in to some content that I think you're going to find to be interesting as you are starting out this new year. And it's all around toxic culture and the warning signs and what you as a leader need to know and are going to want to know so that you can get out of, avoid having, and turn around any toxicity that might be dwelling in your workplace. So I want you to get ready to step into the sandbox, kick off your shoes, because we're going to get ready to go in 3, 2, 1, now. See, toxic cultures, friends, rarely announce themselves. Let's be real. They don't come in with these big, red flags glaring or the horns and the bells and the whistles and say, hello, or someone that you hire to bring on your team that has a history of creating toxicity in the workplace. They don't come in with those same warning signs. But the signs are actually there. It's just knowing how to uncover them. And the challenge for you as a leader is how to see them before it's too late. And today we're going to get into and explore the subtle and glaring warning signs of your toxic workplaces and why you as a leader, unfortunately, you often miss them. But I'm also going to give you some tools of how to act on them as soon as you spot them before they spiral out of control. It's going to be a guide that you're going to use to build that awareness and then take some real decisive action steps to protect you, your team, and your team's performance from this toxicity. So you might be wondering, so Tam, why is toxic culture important to look at? Well, because healthy cultures create thriving outcomes, and toxic cultures take us off the goals and the objectives that we're really setting out to try to achieve. And if you think about it, if we're at the beginning of this new year of 2025, we want to go back and take a look at what are the behaviors that we've normalized in our workplace and what behaviors might be unhealthy, because toxic culture creeps in and it can be undetected when we aren't looking for or don't have, more importantly, don't have the clarity of the culture that we want in our environment. It's kind of like when people say, well, that's just how I am, or that's just, I'm a realist. That's just how I communicate, or this is just how we are. When you hear a lot of those things going on in the environment that you're working with the team, that might be something you want to draw attention to because you may have a blind spot to it. We've created some norms in our conversation that we've focused on, which can ultimately overshadow the well-being of the team altogether. And there are early warning signs that sometimes leaders you dismiss. That's the subtleties of disengagement, passive-aggressive behavior, increased in gossip, right? When Glenn the gossip shows up, or when that Dorothy the destroyer shows up in your workplace, that passive aggressive, it might be from a high performer, but they've got those behavior patterns that is actually having a ripple effect far beyond that individual. So I want to give you the top 5 that I have put together, the list of the top 5 toxic culture warning signs for you. You've got a list of top 5, so get ready to write these down. First and foremost is communication breakdown. Now, I've been talking about communication for years, for decades, and it's important, but the importance of it. But here's what I want to bring to your attention is that when you have frequent miscommunications from unclear expectations or people are withholding information, that's a sign of a breakdown in trust in your workplace. Those communication breakdowns are often because it's a behavior we've allowed or it's a trust breakdown that we have, and that can create toxicity in the environment, especially when you have people that are effective with their communication and they're effective with not only setting expectations, but understanding and delivering on those expectations. And when they see other people getting away with these bad behaviors, that's something that allows that toxicity to enter into your team environment. Another warning sign for you to be aware of is disengagement, that apathy, that complacent Charlie syndrome, as I call it, that lack of initiative, or maybe you even have a high turnover rate. I was on the phone the other day with a couple of folks from a company that says, hey, Tam, we want you to come in and help us because we see that we have some things going on in our workplace and we want to get a handle on it. And like, okay, well, cool, let's talk about that. And what it ended up coming down to is they have some in a couple of positions some high turnover, but they've allowed the explanation, or I'll even say the excuse of the positions as high turnover, that, well, because people just, they get into that position and there's really no other place in our organization for them to go. Well, that's on us as leaders. If we're creating an environment that we hire people into a position we know they're going to be disengaged with quickly, we're costing the company money, friends. So we want to get ahead of that, get a handle on that. And let's start asking some questions about how do we create engagement for, especially if there's target key positions that tends to have a high turnover rate. Is it just because they're disengaged? Is it just because they don't see a path forward in the organization, or is it something else? And those people with lack of initiative, I'm going to encourage you to get some really great behavior-based questions that you ask in your interview process. And in your first 90 days in that onboarding process, you want to really be drilling in to see if we've hired somebody who interviewed really well, but we know is not going to take initiative when we want and need them to, because that is one of the biggest saboteurs that I have seen for a team impact. That when you have that individual that has that lack of initiative, oh my goodness, that creates a huge challenge for your team, not just you, to manage to that as a leader. So you want to check in on this disengagement. Number 3, cliques and gossip. Groups forming around the office that are gossiping. It creates this opposition environment. Like they're usually gossiping about what leadership isn't doing, what leadership always does, or what leadership never does. And what's important is that you want to get to the core of why they're forming in that clique and gossiping in the way that they are to their coworkers, because that gossip, it spreads like wildfire. And it starts to put question marks in everybody's brain that, are you as a leader do you really truly have my best, highest good? Are you keeping that in your forefront for me as a member of this team? But those cliques and that gossip, go back to high school, friends. How many of you, by a show of hands, liked cliques and liked gossip in high school? In the workplace, it's no different than it was in your hallways at high school, or in the back of the math class, or whatever, wherever gossip and those cliques formed. You didn't like them back then, so why are we allowing them to happen in our workplaces as adults? So think about that for a minute. The 4th area that I want you to, it's a warning sign for toxicity in your culture, is a blame culture, finger pointing, right? It's not me, it's everybody else. And that pattern of finger pointing, instead of being a collaborative problem solver, instead of being a collaborative, I'm going to bring something forward. I may not have the solution. I may not know how to solve the problem, but at least someone that's going to bring forward the problem and identify as, here's something we might want to look at. And then we bring the team together to work on it instead of passing blame. I had this happen to me the other day and it blew my mind. Still, actually thinking about it, I was bringing forward a problem to a manager was our kid's orthodontist office. I'll say where it was. And they have canceled several of his appointments, and he's been delayed in getting the activity that the mouth is supposed to be doing with the braces. I don't know how to say it any other way. They're not performing in the way that they're supposed to be. And yet he's had months and months where we've gone by where there hasn't been an appointment, then they've canceled at the last minute and rescheduled, or he showed up for the appointment and, the orthodontist wasn't there, and all these things. And now we're at the end of the contract and they're like, well, you need to pay an additional 6 to now 8 months because he's behind, but they're taking zero responsibility. Okay. Zero responsibility that they canceled 6 months of appointments. And we had a hard time getting, rescheduled, et cetera. Anyways, I said to the person, I go, at least we're going to meet, we ought to meet 50-50 on this, because you're saying one thing, I'm saying another. We have an experience that says you all have canceled. Your notes say, oh, we only canceled one appointment, which we know isn't true. And I said, so we should at least meet 50-50. And she says, Mrs. Bond, you're asking me something that's above my pay grade. She's the manager of this location. And I said, oh, well, let's find the person that's pay grade this solving this problem falls within, right? So blame culture. They have a blame culture. And when you went around and I was listening to other conversations, you can hear the culture in that environment is a blame culture. And there's finger pointing and no one's taking responsibility. Really toxic. And oh, by the way, they're now on their 4th orthodontist in the last 2 years at that location. I wonder why. Okay. Fear of speaking up is your number 5 sign that you have a toxic culture. When employees avoid sharing their concerns, bringing ideas forward, speaking up out of whether it's fear of retaliation or fear of they're going to be sidelined or fear of the gossip clique that's going to overtake them, all of those things can be true at the same time. But when you have an environment where your team members are afraid of speaking up, that's creating toxicity. And there is a ripple effect from these 5 signs, just the 5. There are many others, but I'm just giving you the 5 most obvious ones right now, or some of them are hidden. One toxic behavior can in fact infect an entire team. Let me say that again. The ripple effect of toxicity is that one toxic behavior can infect an entire team. And the cost for you in ignoring it is the burnout, the turnover, missed opportunities for growth, people, not showing up to work. There's a lot of people calling out sick. All of that can have a direct line to the ripple effect of toxicity. And I want you to think about it this way. You also want to think about it as, what am I missing as the leader that's helping to increase the toxicity, not solve for the toxicity? When you rely so much on metrics over relationships, when you rely on what the performance indicators are saying for satisfaction, than what the relationships and what the communication is happening, right? They might be great. You might have a toxic person that's great at hitting their goals, but the impact that they have to the rest of the team is causing some of those other turnovers in the other positions. And you don't notice it. You think it's the people that are leaving when really it could be the one person. And you've heard me say this in the sandbox before, leaders. I would rather that you address the one high performer that's got the toxic behavior, and even address them by inviting them into a different opportunity outside of your employment to protect the team as a whole, because it's going to be a smaller cost to you, honestly, to replace the one than it is to keep replacing multiples, because this one toxic person is impacting the greater majority of the team. So I want you to focus on your team dynamics versus only on the external of what that one individual might be producing for you. Are they also impacting the team in a positive way? So let's talk a little bit about why you also miss those warning signs. Well, we get blind spots, right? We get comfortable and we create in our mind, we have blind spots that we don't see certain behaviors. You've heard me say it before, and I just heard Ed Milet say it on his most recent podcast. We teach people how to treat us. So we do. And so if you are allowing this toxicity, it's because you're allowing people to treat you and others that way. So you're the major part of the problem with the toxicity leader. And if it's your team, you have the opportunity to change it. And this is how we're going to do that, by spotting the toxicity before it's too late. I want you to do check-ins, right? Your 20-minute check-ins. Let's call them pulse check surveys. Let's call them that. Regularly pop in and do anonymous surveys with your team. Anonymous conversations are great for them to participate in. By that, I mean, yep, you're going to do a survey monkey, but it's anonymous and they can reply. However, you can make that work for you. Give them the ability to anonymously give their feedback. But I also want you to do the pop-ins and the drive-bys on their cubicles in their offices to say, hey, how are we doing? I know we've had some challenges with toxicity. I know that we've had some challenges with gossip or with cliques or with name what it is. How do you feel about that? How are you experiencing that? Right? I want you to also use the power of observation. Pay attention, leader, to how your team interacts with each other in meetings. Where's the corner of people that always sit together that, right, they gossip? Where's the corner of people that sit together disengaged? They're not looking, they're not making eye contact. They're not, they're either on their device or on their computer or taking notes, but there's no interaction with them. That's where you can have the most powerful impact, by your power of observation to see, pay attention to. Now that I've brought it to the forefront of your mind, you're going to be looking for these signs of toxicity in your workplace, and you're going to be able to have conversations about it, which is so important. Is then I want you to create safe spaces where people can give feedback. I want them to be able to share their concerns. That's why we're going to have these little conversations. But you're also going to be looking at the team performance trends. Watching for those declines in productivity, yes. Watching for the decline in collaboration, watching for the decline in enthusiasm and engagement with each other on the team, also with you on the team. When it comes to giving a new assignment out, how do they receive that? That's a performance area that you can be watching for to help see, might we have some toxicity building here in our workplace? And then, you know, I don't know. I like exit interviews, but I'd really like for you to do more on the upfront interview on the front end, because that's going to help you to solve the toxicity before it comes into your workplace. But if you're also getting, in those exit interviews, when people do leave, look for patterns, and that's going to be really important. I mean, I would name it. I would say on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high. Would you rank us on how you feel we are with the toxicity in our workplace? What's the culture like here? What's the culture that we have here? Is it a positive culture? Is it a negative culture? Is it a fear-based culture? Is it a high performance culture and I can't run the risk of failing, so I'm going to not show up to work because I'm going to burn myself out, or I'm going to be, taking all my sick leave because I'm afraid of failing. So if I call it sick leave, I'm not really failing. Do you see where that goes? You're going to start to be able to ask those questions in interviews, exit interviews, and also those pulse check-ins to see how we're doing. So let's talk about the steps that you want to take when you spot toxicity in your culture, in your workplace. Address it up front and directly with honesty and transparency. First key, number 1, you want to enlist the help of other people on the team. You want to name it by getting those flip chart papers out and have people talk about what are the behaviors that we want. What's a toxic culture look like? How are we on that scale? Do we have a toxic culture? Are we running the risk of having a toxic culture? And then you want to talk about the behaviors that we want to model so that we have that healthy culture versus the toxicity. When you're wanting to remove it, you're going to have absolute zero tolerance for things like gossip, like cliques, like passive aggressiveness. You want to have a zero tolerance rule for that. And when you name that up front and people know what to expect from you, and you're also modeling it yourself, because, oh, by the way, you might be the one that's passive aggressive and not realize it. So let's tell the emperor that they have no clothes. I'll be the one to say that. Check yourself, get in the mirror and check in with you, get with your mentor, a peer, to help you see where these behaviors that you might be modeling that are not the behaviors that we want for our team. And we want to hold team to the realignment of our values and to the expectations. Hold your team to that. Set it up with them. Have them be part of the conversation. It's super, super imperative. And number 7, this is my last one for you. How do you prevent toxicity from taking root? Those regular check-in meetings are key, individual and as a team, but also defining the culture that we want, not just the results. How are we going to feel when we have that culture? What's going to be different when we have the culture that we say that we want? What will we recognize and reward when we have that culture? How do you want to celebrate for having that culture? And again, having and setting a zero tolerance policy for toxic behaviors in the workplace and sticking to it. Even when it's your top producing high performer, stick to it, because I would rather have a medium producer that's not got the toxic patterns of behavior, because I can grow that medium producer with no toxic patterns into a high producer when I remove the high producer toxic person from the environment. Think about that for a minute. What are you holding on so tightly, or who are you holding on to so tightly because they perform for you, but they're creating an environment where the others are being suffocated by them? That means you have a toxic person dwelling in what's creating a toxic culture in the workplace. And it's up to you, leader, to get after it and take care of it. The cost is clear on when you think about how much turnover costs in a work environment. And when you have the ability to transform that by stopping toxicity and transforming it into the positive that you want with the behaviors, aligning it to the values, it's a game changer. And let's just remember this, friend. It's your final thought. Toxic culture does not announce itself with a loud bang or with a parade. It creeps in quietly. It's the silent saboteur. And when you can spot it early, address it boldly, and protect the health of your team, you're going to increase performance across the board. And more importantly, you're going to create an environment where people thrive and they enjoy coming to work every day. They want to be in that environment because they see you as a leader that's taking care to address the needs that they have, instead of allowing the toxicity of a silent assassin in your work environment take control. Because that's what toxicity is. It is the silent assassin in your work environment. Bold? Yes. Do you have the ability to change it? Absolutely. I want you to reinforce your core values. I want you to communicate boldly what we are going to accept and what we are not going to accept. And I want you to think about it this way. Employee turnover can cost you 100 to 213% of an employee's annual salary. So when you're in your hiring and you're in your onboarding phases, that's where you can start to identify what has the potential to become toxic with a behavior that you want to change. But it's also important to decide, define, and align the behaviors that you are only willing to accept in your workplace, and get everybody on board to hold each other responsible to model those behaviors every day, so that toxicity, we talk about it to keep it out. We don't hide from it so that it festers, swells, and grows into something super unhealthy. Hey leaders, thanks so much for joining me in the sandbox today. I am thrilled every week that we get to drop new content and have powerful leaders just like you not only engage with it in the sandbox, but you also are engaging with me on social and email. And I'm getting messages from people all the time that are appreciating the opportunity to learn how to develop themselves as a more impactful and effective leader and communicator in the workplace and in life. Now, listen, leadership is not something that you're born with. It's something that you grow into. And I celebrate you for taking time today to grow into your next level of leadership in the sandbox. Now, I want you to like, share, subscribe to this podcast, The Leadership Sandbox. Share it with a friend. Drop a comment. Tell me how you're impacted by the work that we're doing here at The Leadership Sandbox every week. I'd love to hear from you. And on your way to becoming a more effective, efficient, and high-performing leader, I want to give you a high five virtually and say, well done, leader. You are off to great things because you took time to grow today. Make it a great day, and God bless you.